Hello again. Let's kick off with a quick question. What connects the global CGMA accounting designation, the AICPA's series of annual CFO conferences, and the job title Chief Turmoil Officer? Well, to be honest, I've no idea yet, but that's because my guest does. He is Ken Witt, a senior manager at the AICPA, and obviously that makes him a colleague of mine. And he'll be tying all of this together for us in this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. Welcome to the podcast, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. From the heart of London, I'm Kyle Hannon, in a city that at the moment is much quieter than it normally is. But never mind, every week we pick up the conversations that you might be missing in other places by sharing insights from inside the accounting and finance profession here on the podcast. We help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever business you're in and wherever you're based. This week's episode is all about CGMA, the CFO Conference, and turmoil. And the man to talk about all of that is my guest, Ken Witt. Ken, welcome. Where are you joining us from?
Durham, North Carolina. Actually, Chapel Hill.
Yes, indeed. And we are actually colleagues in different parts of the world, though the desks we're using aren't the ones we'd normally be using in the standard 9 to 5. And it is certainly a time of disruption and turmoil, but we'll get to that in a bit. You're here to talk to us about the CFO Conference, about the CGMA. And before we do all of that, tell us about the type of work you do. What do you do for the association?
So I'm on the management accounting team at the association, and I do a number of things. I am the liaison to a committee of our members in business, the Americas Region Advisory Panel, preside over our quarterly AICPA Economic Outlook Survey. I work with our research team here and in London that create thought leadership for our members, and also involved with our academic and student team and the efforts that they are engaged in to connect with academics and students around business needs.
Part of that connection is what we'll be talking about, the CFO Conference. What is that?
The AICPA Conference is an annual event that's been in existence for more than a decade now, and it's geared towards our members who are CFOs or aspiring CFOs of their companies, and is designed by a committee of members who represent that constituent group, and primarily the CFOs of larger SME companies. I would say that's our sweet spot, companies that need to have a qualified accountant to handle their accounting and reporting issues. But many of them that work in these organizations also have a broader range of responsibilities. So we have a wide range of topics. It is held in various locations. We rotate the locations from East Coast, West Coast, Midwest to make sure it's accessible to the wide range of participants and also speakers. And we've been offering online options for a few years, full conference, part conference, and our 2020 conference, though, was absolutely entirely virtual. The speakers that the committee pulls together have really been outstanding for several years now, and most of them receive very high marks for their presentations, and the topics cover a wide range of emerging issues, leadership skills, business challenges, and things that are really of interest to this segment of our membership.
In addition to those on-the-ground conferences, which would be happening in a normal year, you have been putting together a series of rebroadcasts from previous conferences, and that's something we're going to be talking about in our conversation today, because you've got a couple of those rebroadcasts coming up shortly, and we'll be telling people how they can access those or get access to more of the conference events themselves that are going to be coming up. You've mentioned the speakers you have, but what level are they? Are normally from inside the accounting profession only, or they're people that are more kind of wider thought leaders? And who would normally come along to the event? I know it's called a CFO conference, but is that the only type of attendee you'd get?
It really is a broad range of speakers. A lot of business consultants, for the technical accounting stuff. We're also usually blessed to have people from the major firms provide those updates, leadership skills. Big topic recently is cybersecurity, and so we've been fortunate to have excellent speakers for the most part.
What about the people who'd come along? Is it only for CFOs, or do you find a wider group of people, some that are ambitious? The CFOs of tomorrow are there today.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's really geared towards CFOs or aspiring CFOs. And the companion conference that we have was originally called the Controllers Conference. And that has sort of migrated to become what we call now the Corporate Finance Conference. But that still attracts a number of controllers and it also attracts CFOs. And, what we find is we have some people who will do the CFO conference one year, the Corporate Finance Conference the other year. And we have a lot of what I kind of laughingly refer to as repeat offenders, people that really do appreciate the value of the conference and the relationships that they build over time and are with us year after year.
Yes, we've had some of those repeat offenders as guests on our podcasts in the lead up to previous CFO conferences too. So give me an idea of what the point of the rebroadcasts are, because you do these every year as well. You've been making conference material accessible for a while anyway. So it has been accessible not just for those people who are actually there on the ground. So give me an idea of why you rebroadcast some of these sessions, because we've got a couple more of those rebroadcasts coming up in the next few months. We're going to be talking about those shortly. How do you pick which presentations or what type of topics to actually rebroadcast? Because things change quickly, don't they? What might have been a popular speech last year when rebroadcast this year may not sound as relevant.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And that's part of our sort of thinking when we sort of select these conferences to rebroadcast and the timing of how we deliver them. So the rebroadcast sessions that we have coming up this spring are from the CFO conference that was held in September of last year. Basically, we've been doing the CGMA webcast series for some time now. And, it includes the free presentations that we make available to our CGMA designation holders as part of their member benefit. And it also includes these rebroadcasts. We select them from our CFO conference and our corporate finance conference, which is CFO conference is usually held in the spring or early summer, and the corporate finance conference is held in the fall. So I'm a liaison to the CFO conference planning committee, and a colleague and I are also liaison to the corporate finance committee. So we attend these sessions at the conference and identify the ones that we think both have the staying power, the relevance for the coming season for our rebroadcasts, and also we sit as the SMEs for those conferences and hopefully are able to answer any questions that come in from the audience.
The one that we're going to be talking about a little later, the first of these rebroadcasts, which is coming up in a couple of days, I believe, is certainly a topic which I think will certainly catch the eyes of many people. They'll be talking about what it means to be a Chief Turmoil Officer, which as far as I know wasn't on the list of desirable jobs up until last year, but certainly it seems to be more and more relevant. Before we talk about that, you did mention that you're offering CPE credit, there's member discounts to AICPA members, but there's an additional discount to members who are CGMAs. Now, for those people who do not know what a CGMA designation actually is, let me just ask you briefly about that, because that's the core part of the work you do. For someone who doesn't know much about CGMA, what does it actually stand for?
All right, sure. The CGMA designation is the Chartered Global Management Accounting designation, and it is essentially what many around the world know as the CIMA designation that's been in existence for over a century, but we named it CGMA and launched in the U.S. when we formed the association between the AICPA and CIMA.
Is that a certification for accountants? Is it a qualification? Is it just a kite mark of competency for a particular skill set?
It is a designation. There's a difference between a designation and a certification. You can get a certification for just completing a series of courses or whatever, but it is a qualification that's built on a competency framework that is updated on a regular basis to reflect the needs of business. The competency framework includes technical skills, business skills, people skills, and leadership skills, and the most recent update also includes a core of digital skills that are connected to each of those other components of the framework, and certainly digital skills are an increasingly important component in today's environment.
Where is it generally prominent? Give me a sense of its footprint in the global profession. Is it national? Does it have a higher profile in certain regions, or is it more and more a global designation?
It's certainly a global designation, and it's very prominent in the UK, which is where the CIMA was headquartered, but it's also in all of the regions around the world, and with a more recently, since the joining of the AICPA and CIMA to form the association, we've got an increasing footprint here in the US.
Who'd usually aim for this kind of designation? Is there a typical route they take, and what makes it distinct from other designations in the professions that people may be familiar with?
Well, I think it's really designed for people who want to serve the profession of accounting in business, as opposed to in the U.S. In the AICPA, the CPA is certainly the dominant designation, and it's the sort of entry route into public accounting, which is where many people start their career. There are a lot of people who are really outstanding accountants who prefer to work in business as opposed to taking the public accounting route, and it's designed for them. And there are also a significant number of people who start their careers in public accounting and then move over into business, and I was one of those, and certainly one of the things that people realize when they make that move, they have outstanding accounting and auditing knowledge and maybe tax knowledge and other technical skills knowledge, but when they take a role in a company, there is a lot more involved that they don't have the expertise in. So that's really what the designation is geared towards, those broader business skills. And you asked about how it's distinct from other certifications in the profession. A couple of things that makes it distinct from other certifications are that it's very experience-based. The learning and the examinations are very case-oriented, geared towards solving real-world business problems. And this experiential basis is also reflected in the professional experience requirement that must be met before the designation is granted. And I think in terms of a really key difference between the CGMA designation and certifications, or even, advanced degrees in accounting or MBAs or other degrees, are the ethical requirements that underpin the competency framework and the practice of accounting as a CGMA designation holder.
With the clip we're going to be talking about shortly, the excerpt from your CFO conference about the Chief Turmoil Officer, I get a sense that the CGMA designation is particularly adept at coping with change and disruption. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I think there are a couple of things that I think are really exciting about the CGMA designation, and with all of the disruption going on in business, around the world, businesses are going more than ever to their finance people who can provide them with the analysis of the data that they can rely on for their own decision making. And, this is really the heart and soul of the CGMA designation. In addition to the technical accounting skills, CGMAs are at the center of their business. They have the skills to understand the economic environment and how disruption might impact the business across the whole spectrum of the business model, from the supply chain to the revenue side of the business. Supply chain has certainly been a big factor in the coronavirus disruption, and revenue has been a huge factor, and many of our members have told us that they're reforecasting and forecasting and reforecasting at a frequency that they've never seen before.
You also work with the Finance Leadership Program. Give us a sense of what that does.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that's really exciting is the Finance Leadership Program is the online learning program that we've created to prepare people for the CGMA exams and that qualify them for the CGMA designation. And it's really geared to develop these in-demand skills that encompass operations, management, and strategy. So it's sort of broken down into those three tiers with case study exams for each of those levels. So individuals who study the FLP program work their way through all of the components of each of those levels of the CGMA designation so they can qualify for the strategic case study exam that is the top exam to achieve the designation.
That brings us very nicely to the type of leadership that we'll be covering in the forthcoming rebroadcast from the CFO Conference. And this is all about the Chief Turmoil Officer. Now, we'll be talking to you again in the next couple of weeks, talking about some more of these rebroadcasts coming up. We'll be sharing excerpts from them over the next couple of months. We'll be giving our listeners information about how they can access the webinars. Starting with this one, Chief Turmoil Officer. Tell us a little bit about what else is coming up and then why you've chosen these topics for this particular moment in time?
Okay, yes. In addition to the Chief Turmoil Officer webcast that we'll play a clip from in a minute, the other ones that we have on the agenda for this spring include one addressing cybersecurity in February and another one on succession planning scheduled for March. Obviously, cybersecurity has become one of those risks that's an ongoing concern for everyone. The experts often say, cyber intrusion is not a question of if, but when. On the other hand, many of our members will be able to traverse their careers without facing the challenge of succession planning or lack thereof, but definitely something that is too often neglected. That session will be good. We've got some people who have faced that challenge in their careers who are part of a panel for that webcast. And while there's been a lot of conversation and content about both security and succession planning in our profession, much of that has been on the public accounting side. But both of these rebroadcasts from the CFO conference are from the management accounting perspective. So that's sort of an appealing thing for our target members. And we also have a 2-part webinar on forecasting scheduled to begin in late February that is the first of our free CGMA webcasts for 2021. The best way to access these is to go to AICPA Store.com. And you can filter down from webcast to management accounting, and these webcasts will be there.
So that's all online. Let's talk about what we've got here at our fingertips. Let's talk about the first of these CFO conference rebroadcasts coming up very shortly. When is that rebroadcast scheduled for? Because we're recording this toward the middle part of January 2021, but we know a lot of the podcast listeners don't listen within the first couple of days of release. Quite often, many people discover these podcasts months afterwards. So just to put people in the picture of when we're recording this, when is this rebroadcast coming up?
Yeah, so this is a preview of that, which is scheduled for Friday, the 15th of January.
So, of course, if people are listening to this after the 15th of January, don't panic, because you can still access plenty of other stuff, and we'll put links in the show notes. You can go and have a look at some other free resources. So it doesn't mean there's nothing for you if you haven't caught this fresh off the press. Let's talk about the first session, the Chief Turmoil Officer. Ken, why did you think this would be such an interesting and relevant session?
Well, I think it's a brilliant title to begin with, and I think the subheading is how CFOs are, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. But first, I really like the way Steve Adams from Gartner highlights the role of the CFO in our business environment today. Like I was saying about the Cgma designation and the target audience for our CFO conference, what's really important is providing the perspective and analysis for business decisions, which he really hones in on, and as part of his practice. He is, in some respects, a technologist, but he also serves the business audience. He serves businesses with revenues from $2 million as well as $2 billion. And when people hear some of these names, they think that, that's one of those big firms that serves the big companies. But that's why I liked the perspective that Steve took and applied to this. And he talks about the new ways of working that finance professionals are engaging in. And, that's especially important in smaller organizations like so many of our members work in. They need to cover a lot of bases, and they need to know something about a lot of things.
And he also focuses very much on the pandemic. But there's a lot in this that makes it evergreen, because this isn't the only disruption, the only example of turmoil that CFOs are going to face. So what does he focus on in this clip we're going to be playing shortly?
Absolutely. And the clip we picked was really sort of the overview of what his presentation was going to be about. And he's got what he calls his fish diagram, which is sort of a busy thing. But what he does is he characterizes the 3 phases of the COVID-19 reset over the short, medium, and long term that he calls respond, recover, and renew. And we've been talking a lot about what differentiates the CGMA designation and the role of the CFO. And I think there's been a lot of emphasis lately on we need to be thinking more long term about our businesses. And he really hones in on that. And he's a real fan of alliteration, because then he gets into the different options for different businesses in the renew phase, after they sort of responded and recovered. And in the renew phase, there are a lot of different options recommendations for businesses depending on their circumstances and industry sector and the impact that they've been able to withstand or not withstand, which are rescale, reinvent, return, reduce, and retire. So, as I said, he's a big fan of alliteration, and then he digs into reactions and the strategies that CFOs have taken along their path.
Well, I'm going to do my best to follow his example with the alliterative and see if I can promptly press play. I'll do that in a sec. And I'll also see if I can find a way of getting hold of that fish diagram. Of course, we'll encourage people to catch that rebroadcast of the CFO Conference or the Chief Turmoil Officer, one of many coming up. And just to remind people that the links will be in the show notes. If you've missed this, then there'll be plenty of free material to access. Okay, so before I press play promptly, Ken, just remind us who we're listening to and what is he talking about?
So you'll be listening to Steve Adams, who's a consultant with Gartner, who highlights the role of the CFO in the response to the COVID-19 crisis. And this is one of a handful of rebroadcast sessions that we'll be offering in this spring.
I want to first set the stage and level set a bit so that we're all working with the same context. So that's where I want to bring up this page. And this sort of illustrates the three phases of reset for companies during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is essentially the framework for the timelines that we use when we talk about short, medium, and long term. Now, during that respond phase, the sort of taller orange arc, enterprises started focusing on decisions and actions that were essential to continuing, expanding, reducing, or even suspending operations in direct response to the crisis. Now, as restrictions began to lift, enterprises started to enter that recover phase, and that's the lighter blue arc. Now, this phase saw most enterprises resuming operations in some form, as and when possible. And this resumption required changes to existing capabilities to support new ways of working. So some enterprises had to actually strengthen the capabilities that were initially deployed in that rush during the response phase, which were actually needed for a longer period. And then as far as the renew goes, that dark blue, many have said it before me, and I'll say it again, right? The world is not going to totally return to its pre-COVID state. There is going to be this new normal that will evolve over the longer term. And listen, you could even argue that technically, there's no real end to the renewal phase. The pandemic will create uncertainty and volatility across every sector, and it already has. But it's also going to create opportunity, right? And so companies will need to reset or rebuild their business models and their operations for this new reality. So this is the rough sketch, and I want to kind of pivot a little bit to a much more detailed illustration of what this process looks like and how it's really going to vary for different companies. Now, as you look at this page, I don't want you to freak out, because I know that this is a busy and intimidating and overwhelming slide, but I promise you I will make sense of it. This is what we call our fish graphic. Okay, it was created by Gartner, and there's a few interesting things going on here. So the graphic shows three phases from left to right along the bottom. So we have respond, recover, and renew. And these are the responses that companies take. And frankly, renewal is where companies are sort of making or breaking. It's where industries change. It also shows three phases left to right along the top. So there's lockdown, reopen, and new normal. These are sort of the general phases of the pandemic. So, different people in different geographies are in different places along this spectrum currently. Most of us, however, are still somewhere within that reopen phase. And then, along the right, we have these 5 R's. And these really focus on how things will play out for different companies as they respond to and react to and adapt to the pandemic differently. Okay, because some businesses will rescale, some will reinvent, some will return to normal, some will reduce, and some will retire. And so I'll actually toss out a few examples to help folks kind of understand what this probably will look like and make it a little bit less abstract. So the e-commerce industry is, I think, a good example of an industry that's going to rescale, right? We've seen organizations, like PayPal, like the Visas of the world, redefining their business, scaling up their support for e-commerce, and offering new services. As we emerge from this pandemic, the e-commerce industry will stay extremely strong, extremely powerful, and extremely relevant. In terms of an industry that will reinvent, I think the restaurant industry is a good example. I think we will see in the long term more delivery, more curbside pickup, more grocery sales out of small restaurants. So they're kind of taking a little bit of a different approach, but they're keeping their core essence. In terms of returning to normal, banks, I think, are a good example here. Now, listen, digital banking may increase in favor, but overall, the banking industry has remained pretty unchanged for the last 800 years. I think that it'll ultimately take a little bit more than COVID-19 to change that, frankly. Reduce, I think a good example here are department stores. So I think, most of us knew that department stores had a relatively gloomy fate to begin with. They're not going to be totally eliminated, and I think that's a good thing, but they will be reduced, right? And we've already seen this with some popular brands, right? Macy's, J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, JCPenney. There have already been a number that have had some big bankruptcies and shutdowns. And then lastly, on the retire, I want to throw movie theaters out there. Now, I'm not sitting here predicting that movie theaters will be wiped off the face of the earth. But the reality is there will be fewer, and the ones that do survive will look different over time. And we can expect many to retire. So, there's probably not going to be any single industry, including cruise ships, that will be completely eliminated from this. But I think that kind of gives you an idea for how different companies and different industries are going to emerge from this very, very differently. And of course, we'll see how things continue to shake out. But the reason that I share this page is I want to highlight a few things, right? So first is the experience of companies has been and will continue to be radically different depending on industry. But more importantly, the second thing is I want to highlight something really important about this graphic. And this is very intentional. So if you look at the far left side, right, that vertical line underneath of lockdown, what you'll notice is we all started from the same place, right? The blue and the orange line merged there. When lockdown began, we were all more or less on an even playing field. And COVID-19 has disrupted that playing field, right? And listen, maybe it's unfair, maybe it's not, but that's the way it goes. Now, certainly some companies have only needed to keep doing what they were doing to excel. But as we know, other companies have completely reinvented themselves. But I think importantly, right, just as we all started in the same place, we all have the potential to end up in the same place too, right? We just have to make the right business decisions along the way. So although not all of these decisions are in control of the CFO, what I want to talk about is what's in the CFO's control, how CFOs and other finance leaders as well can really get the most out of our organizations.
An excerpt from the forthcoming CFO Conference rebroadcast. It is scheduled for this Friday, the 15th of January 2021. Steve Adams from Gartner talking about the role of the CFO as a Chief Turmoil Officer. And there'll be more excerpts coming up in future episodes. And of course, Ken Witt from our CGMA team will be talking about those closer to the time. Ken, while we have you here, let's wrap up with a quick mention of some other resources that you would recommend for people who may be wanting to expand their knowledge of the CFO role, of the accounting and finance profession. What would you say people could have a look at this coming weekend?
Well, I think in addition to the CGMA webcast series that I've been talking about here, there are a lot of learning resources on the AICPA Store, including specially designed certificate programs on different topics like data analytics and cybersecurity. And of course, while you're at the store, you can also find the 2021 AICPA CFO Conference, which is scheduled for May 5th to 7th in San Diego, and the 2021 Corporate Finance Conference that I mentioned earlier is scheduled for October 27th to 29th in Las Vegas. And that conference is a combination of our previous Controllers Workshop and the Corporate Finance Conference. So we get a lot into financial planning and analysis, and both of these are currently planned to be hybrid events, both live and virtual. So hopefully we'll have some on site in May, and hopefully especially by the time we get to October, we'll be able to be on site.
But that'd be marvelous. So we could be seeing people face to face again, which is nice. But the good news is, as you say, a lot of this stuff is available virtually. And for our global audience who can't make it all the way there for one reason or another, there are plenty of options for them to access these conferences. And there are a range of free resources alongside those as well. So while some of this, the conferences example, do come with a charge, I know there are early bird discounts available until the end of March 2021. Ken, how would people find out more about those, and especially the early bird discounts?
I think just go into the AICPA Store page, and you can identify the type of event that you're searching for, whether it's a learning program or a webcast or a conference. So you can filter by conference and also by management accounting and by date. So once again, the date for the CFO conference is May 5th to 7th, and the date for the Corporate Finance Conference is October 27th to 29th.
And as we said, the links in our show notes will take you directly to many of our CFO resources. Some of those free, some chargeable, and that will include articles, professional insights, podcasts, training, and much more. So just look at the show notes. Two other websites we'd recommend that help you stay ahead of the curve: AICPAstore.com/go-beyond-disruption or CGMAstore.com/go-beyond-disruption. You'll find a useful mix of free and paid-for resources on pretty much any topic related to the finance and accounting profession. So go there and have a browse. Once again, thank you so much to my guest, Ken Witt.
Thank you, Kyle.
And of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, go tell someone about it, and we'd love to know what you thought of it. And of course, you can tell us what you'd like to hear more of. Email us via the feedback link in our show notes. From the offices of the AICPA and CIMA in the heart of London, I'm Kyle Hannon, and we'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.